All right, people, the summer movie season has officially started, and it's a momentous occasion because we have the first ever Marvel movie with an F-bomb dropping it. It's never, we're living through history right now. I just needed to put that out there first and foremost. I'm, of course, Don the Movie Nerd, and I'm joined by first-time guest to the show, John Maffeo. I think that's how your Instagram handle goes, right? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that. We'll go with that.
Yeah, first time on, man. Happy to have you here.
Thanks. Happy to be here. I'm excited to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy, which I think is, with the F-bomb, is cementing itself as like the trilogy in the MCU.
Indeed. Like, we got a lot to talk about just with this movie, how it came to be, its inception, its kind of its rare placement within the MCU. Because again, the MCU and just people's overall perception of it, it's changed a lot since those first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies. So we're going to talk about all of that and more, and as well just how this is kind of the kickoff to really the first major summer movie season that we've had since pre-pandemic time. It's kind of wild. I feel like that's like the one instance where that people aren't talking about with this. All of that and more covered on today's episode of the Talking TV podcast, and the first episode in our summer series installment. Stay tuned. All right, what is going on, people? Happy to have everybody here in the kickoff episode for our summer slate. We teased it last week, but like I said, this summer we have the first full summer slate of movies since 2019. It's been so long, after the year of no movies with 2020, the year with some movies, but most of them were on streaming in 2021, then the year of what was supposed to be like a return to form, and then kind of just ended up really being only about two movies last year, Top Gun and Avatar. We finally have an actual slate of summer movies, and I'm joined by first-time guest of the show, but he's been around for a while, John Maffeo. Happy to have you here, dude.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I think it is kind of crazy thinking about it. Like, this is 2020, like 2022, 2023. Like, we had, even like this year, like we had a lot of March especially has been a lot of big movies that have actually been successful money-wise. So it does feel like this is like the real first summer movie season where people are actually probably really going to the movies.
Well, because if you break it down what happened last year, it's like, I would say that, I mean, we got a couple movies in January and February of last year, but for the most part, I feel like the Batman was like the real true return to theater movie event of last year. But the issue was that, like, I mean, and we do still have this happening. I mean, I think it's like a little bit longer now, but it's like, I think the window between theatrical releases and going when they would drop right on streaming or like right on HBO Max, it was only like 2 weeks. So like, even though that movie did a lot of money in theaters, like there was still this weird issue of, it's like, okay, are people actually going to see this in theaters, or are they waiting until it comes out on streaming, you know? And then with the summer, like, you had Multiverse of Madness, which was supposed to be like the real kickoff, but then it's like, once Top Gun came out, it like blew everything else out of the water. We still like had a couple of interesting summer releases. We had Thor, we had Nope, we had Bullet Train, but it felt like almost every other movie last summer, it didn't really start to get talked about until it would drop on streaming. Like, I remember what Bullet Train came out in August of last year, but nobody was talking about it until it came out on Netflix in December of last year. So it was always this like really weird push-pull back and forth. Are people going to see movies still in theaters? But this year, 2023, it definitely feels like people have returned to the theaters in droves. You know, you had the viral sensation of Megan. Like you said, you had all the drops in March, you know, Creed 3, John Wick Chapter 4, just to name a few as well. You know, Shazam 2, Scream 6, I know a lot of people went nuts over, you know, and now the Super Mario Brothers movie is set to be like the first major success of this year. And after a relatively slow April, we're finally into May. We finally have our big summer tent poles back. And this is going to be a jam-packed summer. We got a lot of movies coming out. We got the 10th Fast and Furious. We've got a new Pixar movie, the first Pixar movie in theaters. We got Across the Spider-Verse, which is already, the news is already circulated that is set to be the longest animated movie ever made, set to run at least 2.5 hours. You have The Flash. I mean, we have like another big superhero event this year, although not necessarily, although it's DC, which means that, you know, it may not necessarily come from stuff that we see on the screen. So like I said, I really wanted to make a big stake on the podcast about, like, you know, the fact that we actually have a summer movie season, because the summer movie season traditionally, I feel like, you know, you and me growing up, just in general, I feel that's always been like such a big, like, important part of our childhoods. You know, that's like where I feel like a lot of movies that we would just enjoy would come out. You know, I mean, Superbad obviously being one of the biggest summer movie successes, because the other instance in which this summer is going to be kind of a little bit of a return to form is that this is the first time that we're actually going to get some comedies in theaters. You got the Jennifer Lawrence movie, No Hard Feelings. You got that Joyride movie. They're actually going to take some risks and not just put the typical based on IP big budget spectacle with some occasional horror thrown in there. So I just think all of that is worth talking about for sure. John, so this is the first time I've ever had you on the show. So I just want to get your thoughts in general, because I feel like everybody has been having like a different like stance on like, oh, where are we as far as like movies go? So would you say that like movies are back for sure, or you think we still got a little bit more to go before they are like officially back?
I mean, I think there are still people who are probably like opting to stay home to like watch movies on streaming just because it's still out there and stuff. But I think it does seem like this is the year where people are generally coming back out to see movies. And I know it costs a lot of money to watch movies, but that's why like Super Mario Bros. I feel like that was the first time everybody who had a family, like kids and whatever, like went out to a theater.
Right.
That's what it seems like. I think it's already the second highest grossing anime movie of all time. It's like getting to Frozen 2 levels, which is apparently the highest grossing ever now.
That's still nuts to me that Frozen 2 surpassed Frozen. And I'm like, oh, because it was so much worse than the first one. But no, Mario, I feel like the thing that the movies have been missing as far as what they were trying to cover, that I feel like they, in a way, did learn from Top Gun and Avatar, is that if people want like to have like, if people want to go out and like have like the real like movie theater experience, they need to be 4-quadrant movies. They need to be like, they can't just be like, oh, fun for the whole family, because the whole family's kind of like got used to the whole streaming experiment. They're like, wow, it's so much easier and less expensive if we just wait for a movie to drop on streaming. It has to be like worthwhile of the theatrical experience. It's kind of what we've been talking about on here the last couple of years. We're like, what exactly is it that makes movies theatrical, for lack of a better word? What makes them worthy of that? And I think that they're finally starting to realize that it has to be an experience, and I think that's what they've learned. For the most part, especially with that summer slate that I just listed off, is that with the exception, I think, of a few, most if not all of those movies are going to be like experiences to view in theaters, and I think that leads us perfectly into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, because, oh man, you want to talk about an experience on the big screen. I feel like this movie just hits all of the different quadrants. That's taking out all the previous history that we have with this franchise, both within Marvel and by itself, because I think that it's safe to say that of all of the micro franchises within the greater MCU, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies have always, I feel like, kind of separated themselves out. They've people have commented on the fact that these feel like James Gunn movies, not Marvel movies. They feel like they have like a very unique, a very personal identity to them that makes them feel just that much more special and unique to fans. So I want you to talk about, so walk me through like your history in general with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and what you remember about seeing it, that first movie, which I can't believe that it's been 9 years since that first.
Yeah, dude.
Good Lord, it's been a long time. Like we spent a lot of time with these characters, both in their own movies and in other Marvel movies. So what was it like watching that first Guardians of the Galaxy movie in theaters when it came out?
Yeah, I mean, well, to piggyback off that last comment, like I feel like people who grew up, like there are kids who were like actual kids when the first one came out, and now they're like in high school probably or whatever.
That actually probably.
Or in college, yeah. But when I went to see the first one, I remember like I still like Marvel, but back then I was a big fan. At that point, Winter Soldier had came out like a few months earlier. Still coming off the Avengers high of like, holy crap, they actually pulled it off and really made this big movie, which Avengers at the time was like, it still is, I guess. Like it was like a really gigantic.
It's just they've topped it since then. No, I was right there. I remember, like, dude, the Avengers was the biggest movie in the world for like a year and a half straight. It felt like.
Yeah, and so then in the summer, like knowing that this movie was coming out, I was like, okay, so this is cool. Like the trailers are cool with Hooked on a Feeling and all that. And I remember going into it and just being like, all right, we'll see what happens. And like I ended up coming out like that was the first time I watched a Marvel movie, and I was like, I actually care about the characters here. So like I'm at the you can talk about the movie at the end where he reads out his mom's letter, where you find out that's where his name is Star-Lord. Like I actually got really like emotional, and I was like, I have not felt like this for a Marvel movie before. This is some special shit. And then it ended up being like one of the highest grossing movies for like an August release, I think, at the time. And like, yeah, you could tell people it resonated with people, and like it's really awesome how like a movie that was at the time when Marvel was still, I guess they were still kind of on the come up.
Yeah.
Even though Avengers was the biggest movie at the time. But like it showed that they could prove they could like give directors like James Gunn the reins and just do what you're gonna do, and you could tell he had a great vision for it because it still holds up today. Like I watched it last week, and like it still is probably like a top 10 Marvel movie.
Yeah, for sure. I remember again, like Avengers is the biggest movie in the world. I'm like at that point, I'm fully into like my Marvel junkie phase. I'm watching anything and everything that I can Marvel wise. I'm into the Avengers animated TV show because because this was like early high school for me, you know, because I
Mhm.
was a freshman in high school when the Avengers came out. So I'm into like the Avengers animated stuff. I'm learning everything that I can about Marvel. I'm doing all my history and research at the backstory because I'm like, oh my god, you know, because like throughout middle school, in high school, like they just made movies on Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America. And because by that point, it had been like a little bit of time since like the early, like the early Bryan Singer and Sam Raimi X-Men movies. It had been like almost 10 years by that point since those movies. And the superhero movies that we had been getting, with the exception of the Nolan Batman movies, you know, we were just off the Dark Knight, but like they were still, you know, not so great. You know, the tide hadn't yet turned on Watchmen, you know, so the early 2010s, we had some rough ones, you know, we were still coming off of like the Ghost
Mhm.
Riders and the X-Men 3s and the X-Men Origins and the Dragon Balls, you know, big budget filmmaking was in a rough spot to say the least, but the Avengers comes out after, and again, it took all the B-list heroes and put them together in order to create like the biggest movie event on the entire planet. But what people forget is that, like, in the immediate aftermath of the first Avengers, Marvel's in a little bit of a rough spot there. You know, Iron Man 3, it does well, but it's kind of like a little bit, you know, it's not as critically well received as the first initial couple of movies. And then Thor: The Dark World is, again, I don't remember how much money that movie did, but memory serves that movie is still kind of like, I want to say it's still the worst reviewed Marvel movie to this day, at least until recent times. But definitely, I would say people were like, okay, is this Marvel thing, is this going to be a one and done? And so Winter Soldier comes out, and that's a moderate success. That's April of 2014. And so going into this movie, like, there was definitely a feeling of like, okay, can Marvel really pull this off? Especially since they were at the time, this was such a big risk. This was a brand new team with characters that nobody had really even familiar with. Even like diehard comic book readers like had some familiarity. We're like, okay, we know who Iron Man is, we know who Captain America is, we know who the Hulk is. Who the hell are these Guardians of the Galaxy guys? You know, this is like some
Mhm.
obscure team from the 70s, you know? And you get a director like James Gunn, who, again, mainstream audiences now are very well familiar with it. But back then, it's like, yeah, I feel like even the most diehard movie fan was like the guy who directed Slither and Super, you know, like he really didn't have that big of a history. It was really in that time when Marvel was just picking and choosing these indie directors from all these different projects and just putting them and just giving them these massive budget movies. Now, again, is that's something that like we cringe at and has kind of become the norm. But back then, again, still, it's crazy for me to be talking about this as like recent history when to me this still feels like yesterday. And I just remember being like, I think the only movie star in the movie who I knew was Zoe Saldana when they first started announcing the cast, because she was obviously made a big name with, you know, with Avatar. But I'm like, all these, I didn't know who Chris Pratt was. I hadn't even started watching Guardians of the Galaxy. Dave Bautista, I'm rolling my eyes. I'm like, oh great, another wrestler. You know, I'm like, what the hell is this gonna be? I don't think it was until they got Bradley Cooper and Vin Diesel, funnily enough, for the voices of Rocket and Groot. But I was like, okay, this could be something. And then that first trailer comes out, and you're like, even by like Marvel standards, quote unquote, because that was really before like Marvel, I feel like, had like that distinct tone that went even into their trailers. That was still like kind of like going off of like the Inception vibe of every trailer having to be Inception. But when Guardians of the Galaxy, that trailer comes out, you're like, oh wow, this is going to be something different. This is unlike anything. This is a big epic space opera. You know, this is not, we're not going to be set on Earth at all. We're really like actually expanding the world, the scope, the universe of Marvel. And the movie comes out, and it's a smash hit. It felt so unique, so original, going all the way to the soundtrack, to just the overall aesthetic. It felt dirtier, it felt grungier, it felt more down to earth than even Marvel, than even like previous traditional Marvel movies had. And again, it just had this really unique, like, punk rock identity where it was mixing like 70s Roger Corman-esque low budget B material, but like with this, but with a budget. Like, it's literally like if you took like one of those B movies from the 70s and gave it like a real budget. And I would argue that even more so than the first couple of Marvel movies, phase one, this movie really sets the tone for the next couple of Marvel movies, just as far as the visual aesthetic look that they established. And these characters and this kind of sect really again it contributed, because the other thing that
Mhm.
people forget as well is Guardians of the Galaxy, more than any other Marvel movies, what sets us up for Thanos, because of Gamora and the character of Gamora and Nebula's direct ties and connections to Thanos that end up playing a major part in both Infinity War and Endgame. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that this movie kind of marks the end of an era, you know, because what's so interesting is that even though it's 3 years between the first 2 Guardians of the Galaxies, just the movies that we get in between those 2 movies, you know, Age of Ultron is the first movie right after the first Guardians. Then you have Ant-Man. Then you have Civil War, which was like the next phase is like, oh, wow, like what else can like the Marvel machine do? You know, we've had 2 Avengers movies by that point, and that's cool and all. You know, I know a lot of people were still let down by Age of Ultron, but Civil War, they're like, a lot of people were going so far as to say that like, wow, this is like the next this was the true Avengers sequel, you know? And so then we get Doctor Strange and the rest of the movies like in between and the rest of the movies really in between Civil War and Infinity War, other than Guardians 2, are like kind of solo one-off movies, you know, in order to like set up and continue and reboot these new heroes. You know, we get Doctor Strange, we get Spider-Man and Black Panther, which are both the solo efforts continuing off of Civil War and establishing those iterations of the characters in the MCU. We get Ragnarok, which is essentially like which is a very, very hard left reboot of the previous couple of Thor movies before Infinity War. Real quick, what's it called? And that also leads us into Guardians 2, which still almost like has this weird backlash where people in hindsight are almost like, oh, that was like almost too much Gunn, which I'm like, well, we both are like, as diehard Gunn fans, I think it's safe to say that it's like, yeah, we don't know what people are talking about with that movie.
It's just silly.
Yeah. It's silly. It's exactly. They're like, oh, it's too much jokes. Oh, it's too much soundtrack. Oh, he thinks that certain jokes are a lot funnier than they are. It's like, I mean, I must have missed all that because I watched Volume 2 and I'm like, yeah, this is everything I could have wanted. This is just more of what I wanted coming out after 1, you know?
It's funny though, because like if anybody who goes on Twitter now, it's starting to be like a revisionist thing going on now. People like posting clips of like Yondu and Rocket towards the end of the movie. And you're like, but look how great this scene is and stuff. Right. Like, yeah, see, like, where were you guys 5 years ago?
6 years ago now. Yeah, exactly. It's like, where were you guys then when that movie came out? Yeah, I think it's safe to say that like people have come around on Guardians 2. And like I said, but not just with the Guardians movies, just with in general the overall climate surrounding Marvel and everything, you know, since then. So like I said, that takes us into Infinity War and Endgame, which is ultimately that's the MCU at its peak. That's like, okay, everything that they have set up over these last 6, 7, 8 years leading up to Infinity War, it all comes together in this gigantic one of the biggest movies ever, like team up movies, the Avengers teaming up with the Guardians of the Galaxy to fight this massive level threat that's been established across the previous 10 years of these movies' existence. Almost every single character that we've gotten to know over the previous course of the MCU all come together in these big smash team up movies. You know, Avengers Endgame comes out 1 year later, and it's the new biggest movie of the world. Marvel has cemented itself. It is the dominant force in pop culture. Now every single movie going forward is going to try and be the MCU. And then COVID happens, and we have a year of no Marvel. And then again, there's a lot of behind the scenes shifts that changes. Disney gets a new CEO. You know, with the shifting of the Bobs, you know, the Disney Plus starts to become a major factor. You start to get all these new Marvel TV shows. By the time you get the first Marvel movie back, it's Black Widow in July of 2021. We've now gone almost 2 years with no Marvel movies in theaters. And I think it's safe to say that just the overall vibes were not there. It was just not there. There felt like there was something missing. It felt like the emphasis was on different things. The filmmaking felt even more sloppier and amateurish going from, you know, and just the reception from people in general, you know, again, the climate being different, people still skeptical about whether they were going to go see movies together in theaters together. I feel like the climate really doesn't come back until No Way Home in December. You know, we have Black Widow in July. We have Shang-Chi in September. We have Eternals in November. We've got all of these TV shows coming out on Disney Plus in between, you know, to try and fill it in. No Way Home is a big hit smash success, but that's when really the MCU, I feel like, recently starts to show its hand as far as playing in the nostalgia of it all. You know, they start to set up their new big bad in the form of Jonathan Majors, Kang the Conqueror, who first makes his appearance in Loki and was just recently the main villain in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which comes out. You have all the behind the scenes drama happening at Disney as, you know, the stock market starts to turn on, as Wall Street starts to turn on Hollywood, who had previously been putting all this emphasis, all this money on streaming, you know, putting all their stuff out and just putting it out directly to the consumer, but they're not getting their money back. So now you have another CEO reshift. Bob Chapek is fired by Disney. Bob Iger is brought back. Bob Iger really starts to refocus things like, okay, less quantity, more quality. Victoria Alonso, who is a major head, also, you know, mega producer at Marvel, is fired. We don't really, the circumstances around her firing are still a little bit confusing, but it's something to have to do with a breach of contract. The word is a little vague. What's it called? Then you have the Jonathan Majors scandal that pops out, which is like, okay, so now you have the guy who was set to essentially be the new Downey Jr. as far as carrying the MCU going forward, and now he's out on alleged what's it called on alleged abuse and assault charges. You have all of this kind of behind the scenes drama that's happening, and just the overall look and turn recently. You have a writer strike that is happening right now. So I think it's safe to say that the overall climate against just Marvel and the studio systems that propped up a majority of major filmmaking in the 2010s, what's it called? You are all kind of in flux right now. And that's before you even factor in the James Gunn of it all, which is you have James Gunn, who was, again, hailed as being this auteur, the guy who made the Guardians of the Galaxy so unique and original, this standout voice amongst kind of the corporate machinations of Marvel. And he is fired for previous tweets that were dug up from the early 2010s from his time in Trauma. Goes over to DC, is kind of scooped up by them because DC is just trying to take whatever piece of Marvel that they can, makes the Suicide Squad for them, comes out. It's kind of like this weird pseudo success during the year of 2021 where it doesn't do well box office wise, but it's a mega hit for HBO Max. It does extremely well, becomes almost like this strange modern day cult hit, leads to a very successful TV show offshoot, and leads to Gunn becoming the new head the new co-head rather of DC before Marvel rehires him to finish off Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which was originally supposed to be their first movie post Spider-Man Far From Home, the kind of the return, the revamp, So now it's been all this time, it's been all these years, what we were supposed to get the first outing immediately after Endgame with these characters. It's now been a significant amount of time. It's been 4 years since the last time you saw these guys in a major movie. They had a little cameo at the beginning of Love and Thunder before briefly departing, So we've had all this time to go since this movie. So kind of, I feel like in a weird way, because of everything that's happened behind the scenes, the stakes going into this movie were even higher. So with all of that being said, now that all of that preamble is out of the way, John, what are your thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? Was it the finale that everybody's been hyping up and that everybody's been promising that it was going to be?
I think it was. Going into it, I wasn't trepidatious, but I was like, James Gunn, you could this man pours his heart into his movies. You could tell every time he has a project, he's not gonna half-ass it. He's gonna put his all into it. And even if people don't agree with it, you can at least go and watch and be like, oh, this man is this is his movie, clearly. And it really shows in this. I feel like Marvel just kind of in the rehiring process, they're like, we're hands off. We're just going to let you do what you're going to do, and we're going to trust you. And I think it shows because when you're watching the movie, it starts off. I don't want to spoil. Are we doing spoilers right now?
Well, we'll save spoilers for a little bit. We are going to spoil it a little bit, but for now, I'll say let's do spoiler free.
Okay. So yeah, the movie opens up in a certain way. It's a very, even for Guardians of the Galaxy standards, I feel like it's more restrained and more restricted in terms of it's not fun per se. It's a more mature route, and you're like, oh, this is what we're doing. And you knew, going into this, oh, okay, this is going to be a more, even seeing the trailers, we're exploring some themes here that are, a lot more mature for, a Guardians of the Galaxy entry. And, people who grew up with these movies, they're old enough now to probably appreciate that. But I think, this movie has everything you want from Guardians of the Galaxy. You have the gang back. You have the jokes from James Gunn with all the characters. But, the dynamic there works. Everybody interacts well. You got Drax with his specific line of humor. I feel like everybody works better in this. The only thing I would say is that this is probably different depending on who you ask, but the whole Gamora situation from what happened in Infinity War and Endgame, that was probably a pivot that had to happen for James Gunn. So and I actually really liked how they handled that story with Gamora and Peter Quill, because that could have been a really hard thing to put out there, because everybody knows, if you watch those movies, I think the only thing if you didn't watch Infinity War and Endgame, if you're going into this liking Guardians of the Galaxy movies, you're like, oh, what happened? But besides that,
I think I missed a couple things.
Yeah, wait, but I do think they end up really doing awesomely. I think by the end of that, I was like, okay, you did what you had to do. You actually made this work. But it's an emotional movie. It's a lot going on, with flashbacks and. It's more Rocket Raccoon story than anything else, and it's very obvious when you're watching it. This is Rocket Raccoon's movie. But it really gives the movie a centerpiece to focus on, and it makes the villain, which I think is definitely one of Marvel's better villains and more realized villains, because he's just a straight up dick. But The guy, I can't pronounce his name. I don't want to botch it, but
Chukwudi Iwuji, the guy's name.
Iwuji, yeah, like he leans full into like just being like a heel and like a major grade A dick, and like and it works. Because he wants to be the smartest dude in the room, and the fact that he's not just angers him, and like it really gives his character. You don't need morality with this dude. You just know like he's bad news, and the Guardians have to get him. They have to take care of the situation. But I like how like his creations really like influence a lot of the movie, and like where location specifically of where they go for one part of the movie when we talk about it later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a Guardians of the Galaxy movie where all the characters working and firing on all cylinders. The emotion is there. I mean, I was misty-eyed for like half the movie, and the ending got me. And a couple scenes where I was like, yeah, I'm crying now. But it feels like a proper send-off for these characters, which at this point, I don't think James Gunn is coming back for a Guardians 4. This is it. And it should stay that way. I don't know. We'll talk more about later, like what they're probably implying for what may or may not be happening with a character or a couple of these characters. But this feels like when you look back at it, I feel like this is probably the most, in a good way, like the most isolated trilogy in Marvel, where like looking back 10 years from now, you could just watch the 3 of these movies, including this one, and like feel like you're watching like a singular story about these characters coming in and like learning and growing and changing and coming out of it as like a better group of people.
I would also say I would also say that in a similar way, I think that Infinity War would factor in, only less so than Endgame, because Endgame they're only like cameoing at the end, really, because a majority of them do not really play a factor in Endgame. And I would say the only one that really gets a major arc in that movie is Nebula. But other than that, yeah, no, I would tend to agree. Going into this movie, I mean, I have been watching all the trailers going, all the way back from when that first trailer dropped back in December. And, when they set that to like, again, I always pay attention to the music, because again, Gunn has made, the music, the needle drops such an important part of the storytelling, not just another cheap instance of, recognize this song, like he's established from the first movie that like the songs and the soundtracks play a crucial part in establishing the identity of these characters in this world, going back to the Awesome Mix Volume 1, and the fact that was like the last thing that the character Peter Quill had from his mother, before she died. And I couldn't agree more, Derpy. Emotional damage indeed, because immediately the thing that is established with the first needle drop, with the acoustic cover of Creep's Radiohead, is we are in for a different kind of movie than the typical Guardians movies. The first two, the first one opened with this incredibly tragic scene, followed by, this Indiana Jones-esque going into this like crazy secluded, temple in order to recover this treasure item, set to Come and Get Your Love, set to what's it called? Come and Get Your Love by Redbone. It's goofy, it's off kilter, it's there to subvert expectations of traditional adventure movies, and and the second one starts with them blasting at this giant alien, which is revealed to be, called an obelisk, with which it literally like vomits up rainbow colors, set to freaking Mr. Blue Sky by Electric Light Orchestra, so like it very much like just going back to Gunn and him really setting himself apart as an auteur, apart from some of these other filmmakers that the MCU has hired in the past. Like the opening scene sets the tone for the movie immediately. We're in for a much more emotional turn. We're in for a much deeper, more not psychological, but more intimate turn, even more so than these characters have ever gotten before. The Guardians, they're all, you can tell they're a little bit older. They've gone through a lot. They're setting up like a more permanent base of operations on Nowhere, which in the holiday special that came out, it was established that they bought it and kind of refurbished it from the collector after the events of Infinity War and Endgame and Love and Thunder, because that's the other kind of weird thing timing wise. There's been a lot of time, a significant amount of time that's happened between this movie and when we last saw them in Love and Thunder. So, you have them wandering around. They're not exactly in a state of disarray, but like you could tell that like kind of that feeling of that feeling of unity of family that they previously established is kind of, it's there, but it's really not. They're kind of hanging on, by a thread. Peter Quill is in a really, really bad spot. And it takes obviously the arrival of a character again that we saw, that was hinted at the end of Volume 2, but that we see, that was revealed in the trailers that Gunn said was going to play a major part in this movie and in the cosmic universe going forward. The arrival of Will Poulter's Adam Warlock to set things going off. And it pretty much sets us up for a movie that was way more Gunn than I thought it was going to be, in that it has a lot more of like emotional baggage. It has a lot more depth. It has a lot more maturity, I guess you could say, but it also gets like really dark. Like, this is dark for a Marvel movie. This is probably the darkest Marvel has ever gone, where you have them going on simultaneously going on this quest to save the life of Rocket, who is grievously injured in the opening scene. And so, like you said, the movie does revolve kind of more so around Rocket in that instance. And then what we do is we kind of get this cap off to this kind of this arc that Gunn has been setting up throughout the last two movies, where we've always had veiled references to Rocket's history as being almost like this science experiment gone awry, you know, that was vaguely hinted at in the first two movies, but we never really actually got to see it. And them going as hard into his origin as they did, and that like really playing into this overall theme of, you know, kind of your, you know, what your chosen family is versus, you know, your birth family, you know, how you don't have to let like the tragedies of your past dictate your future. You know, that's also something that really factors in, because the other instance in which this movie, I think, separates itself identity-wise from the first two is that this is the first Guardians movie that's not really solely about Peter Quill, you know? Like the first two movies, they really did set themselves up about like the establishment of the team, but they really did revolve around, you know, the character of Peter Quill and his identity. The first one obviously being about his mother, and the second one being about his father. And this one, I think, is much more so about the team in general. You know, this, like I said, this team has been through a lot. They've experienced a lot of tragedy, both within, you know, both related to the greater and MCU and within their own team. You know, Peter losing his adopted father of Yondu, and now, you know, the previous love of his life, Gamora, when she was sacrificed. And now he has this new version of Gamora that is that hasn't gone through and experienced all of this stuff with them, and now he's got to deal with that. You know, you have a very much changed Nebula, a very much changed Drax, a very much changed Mantis. You know, Mantis, who we didn't even meet until the second movie. She's been around forever now. It's been 6 years since we were first introduced to her, you know?
Yeah.
And so you have a very much changed team. And so when this tragedy happens, you almost have them like, again, there is a sense of like, yes, getting the gang back together for one last ride. But again, there is this sense of melancholy. There is this sense of, yeah, this is kind of it for these guys. So when the ending happens, and I will say right now that the ending was very, very much a surprise for me, and that I was not at all expecting, you know, going into this, I was expecting at least one or two of these guys to die, at least. And I can say that my first spoiler drop that I will say immediately is that my biggest surprise in the movie was that nobody died at the end. And in a way that ended up being probably the better ending, I think, because I was fully expecting, I'm like, okay, I'm like, you know, Dave Bautista had been talking nonstop about how this was going to be his last Marvel movie. You know, Zoe Saldana just recently said this will be the last time that she plays the character, you know? I just based off what I was seeing in the trailer, I'm like, okay, there's no way Rocket Raccoon walks away alive. I figured that, I'm like, okay, I don't think all of them are going to die. I'm like, I do predict that we will be seeing some new iteration of the team by the end, similar to what happened at the end of Age of Ultron when we had this new iteration of Avengers. But yeah, nobody dies. And it's the fact that, again, the fact that they go their separate ways, and it's to say, okay, yeah, we'll always be this family, but like, we kind of need to go off and all do our own thing now, you know? So much of the time, I think the biggest strength that this movie had going for it is so much of the time, I feel like we as fans would just roll our eyes and be like, oh, okay, they're just taking a break from these guys until they can bring them back for a later installment. And to some extent, that might be true, but I don't know. I think that was, for me, the biggest surprise is the fact that they didn't have to kill any of these guys in order to have like a really satisfying and emotionally fulfilling ending. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And I mean, they set up, I think, like anybody who's seen a lot of movies, like you see that Rocket is, I mean, if we're talking spoilers really quick, yeah, like that, like at the beginning when Rocket is decapacitated, and you're like, oh, okay, so he's probably not going to die because we're setting up this, we're revolving the entire movie around him. But I think it would thematically, he's the only character who would make sense for me watching and thinking about the movie backward. Like he's the only one who would probably die, like with the High Evolutionary. Everybody else is just like, they had their own little arcs they already completed at that point. But yeah, like Zoe Saldana talking about it, like Dave Bautista talking about it. Like I thought Dave Bautista was a goner. I was like, okay, so
right.
They're probably setting up, like, they want you to think, oh, Rocket's going to die. Like, they say how the trailers and how the movie goes, but, like, there's something else going on there. And then, like, they kind of drop a couple things in there. I'm like, oh, maybe they really are going to kill Drax. And then they do something else with Peter Quill. And you're like, oh?
I mean, there's literally a specific moment in this movie where you're like, okay, is Quill a goner? Like, are they going to kill him off? Because that also revolves into, like, the Chris Pratt thing. Outside, you know, where Twitter, like, has weirdly, and just the public perception is just turned on Chris Pratt. And I'm like, oh, no, is that going to influence the movie? I'm like, I know that him and Gunn are, like, really close friends. And then they did. And I'm like, phew, okay, so that didn't go that way. But, yeah, there were a couple brief moments where I'm like, are these guys going to not make it through, you know?
Yeah, they held on the Chris Pratt thing just long enough where I was like, oh, they're really going to do this shit. And then it ends up not. I'm like, all right, well, then, yeah, it would feel weird if he died anyway. So I'm just glad, like, the ending was surprisingly optimistic and hopeful. And I was like, this is really well done. I feel like James Gunn is leaving Marvel with like a sense like the finality and like leaving with a smile on his face. Like he's able to leave these characters on a happy note and leave them in a place where if they're not happy, they're at least in a better place in terms of an explorative standpoint, where like they're on their own and or doing something that they want to do, and like everybody's in a place where you can leave the theater being like happy that these characters got an ending that like is not miserable, which is what they've been doing. They've been in a miserable place for a long time, so to
Yeah.
have them really cement that family angle and have them do that, it's like okay, like and the song they use, the Florence and the
Perfect.
Machine, is
The
like
Florence it was perfect. Probably and I already thought that them ending what's it called? I already thought that them ending volume 2 with the double needle drop of what's it called? The Cat Stevens song for Yondu's funeral, and then the what's it called? The Mommy's All Right, Daddy's All Right for during the credits. I already thought that was a banger enough ending for volume 2, and then for them to top that for this one, I'm like, okay, like again, just Gunn knows exactly what he is doing with Gunn knows exactly what he is doing with this one. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's the fact. I think the most satisfying thing for me is the fact that, you know, again, like there's a universe, pun intended, in which we would never even would have seen another Guardians movie. You know, they would have just capped it with volume 2, and then they would have kind of had like the Guardians be this ancillary team that would just, you know, pop up every once in a while and just as cameos throughout other movies, you know, in Thor and such. So the fact that Gunn really does like, again, like, no, this sect of the MCU, or this story rather, around these characters, you know, he set up the cosmic verse, and we will obviously see the cosmic verse in future MCU installments going forward, you know, if that. But like this sect, these characters, their story is wrapped, is finished, you know, and I think that's part of the reason why people are having such a positive reception towards this, you know, in what's it called, you know, you know, a lot of people saying that this is the best Marvel movie since Endgame, you know, is the fact that it is focused back on. I feel like every movie that has come out, you know, you look at the ones that have gotten, in my opinion, the most positive reception post Endgame, you know, that really being No Way Home, you know, if you want to go to the TV shows, WandaVision, Hawkeye, I know got a lot of positive reception as well, which is that they're about the characters and not really about setting up for what's happening. You know, I feel like a lot of problems that people have been having with a lot of the new MCU movies is that, even more so than previously, like they are just so focused on just setting so much stuff up. Like Loki, I know a lot of people enjoyed Loki, but that was really just doing nothing but set up for the future stuff, you know, especially once you realize that Kang is coming out, you know, Quantum, and the most recent Ant-Man, you can make an argument like that's a Kang movie, not really an Ant-Man movie, you know, you know, Falcon and Winter Soldier is trying so hard to set him up as the new Captain America that it feels like they're missing really a lot of stuff about Sam Wilson, the character, you know. Black Widow literally just feels like a repeat, because it's like, okay, we probably should have gotten this movie like years ago, you know. This movie just feels like a little bit late, especially since the movie's real only function is just to set up, you know, a new Black Widow, you know. And so the fact that you have a movie that, again, doesn't seem too concerned with the greater machinations of the MCU, that just wants to be a really good movie about these characters, wrapping up all of these characters, you know, it's what I've been saying since the beginning. Character dictates story, not the other way around. And it's a prime example of it here. You know, you're invested in each one of these characters. You're invested in every single one of their stories going forward, you know, and the movie flows as well. Like, the story is engaging and invigorating. You know, it's a race against time, stop the clock kind of a movie, you know, where they're going on all these crazy quests and adventures and infiltrations and crack heists and going up against the big bad. You know, you have, this movie fits so many different genres, and it's a shoot 'em up movie. You know, you have it becomes like an old boy movie. In the last act, where you have this one elongated tracking shot sequence where you have all the Guardians just going through a hallway, just mowing through armies of goons in the most like CGI, or like just orgasmic goo filled like freaking scene that you could have possibly seen, like with all like this disgusting blood and guts that is only stopped from being rated R by the color coding and the fact that it is around like crazy looking, colorful looking CG creatures, and it's all set to No Sleep Till Brooklyn by the Beastie Boys too, and it's just completely like invigorating and fun, you know, in just a way that I feel like a lot of Marvel movies haven't been. Like, what did you think of just like the action in this movie? Like, this movie just filmed on a different level. Like, some of the way that they were shooting some of these action sequences, like the opening fight scene with Warlock, like I said, the end hallway sequence, that one scene where they're all like taking shots at the High Evolutionary, you know, when it's him versus Rocket, then all the other Guardians show up. Like, just from an action standpoint, this is easily the most engaged that I've been with an MCU movie in a long, long time.
Yeah, I think like James Gunn, like he's always, I feel like, especially since Volume 2, you could see like his sensibilities as a filmmaker have really increased when it comes to an action standpoint. Like he's always been a creative mind, but like that's like somewhere where he's improved. I think between Volume 2 and making the Suicide Squad, like he brought a lot of that to this movie, and like having it really work in like it does like work. What you say in the Race Against Time, like you feel like there's an urgency to every scene where like even like just normal scenes are just like there's a sense of like you really got to keep pushing forward. And I mean, I'll bring up like the weird goopy planet thing that they have to
Yeah,
go
the
into
what the
when Nathan
orgosphere or
Fillion.
whatever it was called.
Yeah,
Like again, like that's what I mean when I talk about like really tapping into Guns, and like that goes all the way back to his trauma origins, you know, with
yeah,
the
that
movies
was
that he
very
worked on
trauma.
there. Like it like
Yeah,
all of these different, you know, like the Lloyd Kaufman inspirations that he has there, you know, like again, all these like these really goopy, but again, it makes the again, even though there's a lot of CG and effects in this movie, it makes the movie feel like that much more real and like lived in, you know?
yeah. I think like that hallway sequence though is probably got to be like a top 3 James Gunn sequence when it comes
Easily.
to like
Easily.
setting up like the marks and setting up the blocking of the characters. It's a pretty long sequence too. They pretty much play out the entire No Sleep Till Brooklyn song. And by the time the sequence is over, like it's like a 3-4 minute sequence, and like the camera's constantly zooming around, going this way, going that way. And it makes me excited for his Superman movie because like
Yeah.
I don't know what he's gonna do, but like you could tell like that movie's gonna have heart and it's gonna have great action. Even with Adam Warlock, like a lot of the scenes where he's just like flying around, like there's a scene towards the end where he's flying on Counter Earth and he's like
Yes.
that's Superman sizzle reel shit right there. Like
Right.
he's just trying to like this is what I'm guessing that's what Superman's gonna kind of look like when it
Right.
comes to
I
his
would
flying
imagine.
sequences.
I would
But like
imagine.
I think like he really like James Gunn like he put in the script for this and he's like I'm gonna make this like the best shit like that I've ever done so far yet.
Yeah.
Like he's not like I mentioned before, he's not half-assing anything. He really is pushing these sequences forward, and yeah, he's a genius. This dude, like he knows what he's doing.
I think what we have here, it's another instance of again just like a director getting to pull one over on the studio, because again, like you have what's been the biggest thing that directors have said about Marvel. They're like, yeah, we really only shoot the talking scenes. You know, they already have the action and the pre-visual set for the action sequences. You know, so we really don't handle that. But Gunn has always said that like he handles his stuff differently. He oversees everything, which again is part of why his movies always feel so separate and unique from the rest
Right.
of the MCU. And you could just tell like he's like, oh, so this is the last paycheck I'm gonna get from Marvel, and they already fired me, and DC has already let me do it, and now I've become like so much better and bigger as a result of being with DC that now Marvel is coming to have to come back to beg me to finish you know, their movie for them. I'm gonna make this the biggest, most crazy. I'm gonna make all of their other movies look like crap compared to this. I'm sure that's not a conscious thought that he's got, but it's got to be like floating around somewhere. And
I think it's like in the back of his head
it's got to
somewhere.
be
Like
like in the back of his head
it's a
somewhere.
flex.
You
Like
know?
I want you to miss me when I'm
Yes,
gone.
exactly.
Kind
And
of shit. Like
by God, he did that. Like, like just from a visual look, like some of the designs that he had for some of those creatures, like all like the mutated animals on Counter Earth and all the various and assorted different things, the High Evolutionary, you know, and like the characterization of the High Evolutionary as well, like this Dr. Frankenstein as character who, for the first time in a while, you don't have a villain that you really like you understand him, but like you don't have a villain that you really like feel for. I feel like a lot of the I feel like now a lot of the villains that we've gotten now just in pop culture in general have always tried to be villains that like, oh, you have to feel for them. They always have to be misunderstood and tragic, you know, in some way. And James Gunn was like, nah, I'm just making a guy who's just a straight up dick. Like just a straight up dick. Like he wants you to hate this guy, this High Evolutionary character, and my God, does he pull it off? Because I mean, look, I talked about this before. One of the easiest things that you could do to get audiences to hate a character is to just like, again, just have them like torture innocent things. And there was nothing more innocent than like torturing and experimenting and mutilating on like cute little animals. Because oh my God, like these rocket flashback sequences, like this is what people are talking about. Like there are a lot of instances where I'm like, are we sure this is a kid's movie? And I don't do that a lot. I'm not one of those guys that is often like, oh, you know, this is for kids versus this is only for adults. But I was definitely watching this. I'm like, I don't think kids should be seeing stuff where it's like, again, there is a horrific scene where like, you know, certain of Rocket's flashbacks, you know, you see him interacting with a couple of the other like experimented animals. You know, you have this otter named Lila, this rabbit with robot legs and a clamp over its mouth called Floor, and a walrus that's literally like attached to like what is it, like almost like a pair of wheels, essentially. And you have this elongated sequence where again these animals are being utilized by the High Evolutionary in order to in order to work on his new batch, because he's like kind of always working on and perfecting his new test area of subjects. He's also revealed to have been the creator of the Sovereign, that golden race that you saw in Volume 2. That had also now subsequently created Adam Warlock. And yeah, and then it's just revealed it's like, oh, I only created you guys because you're helping me create this new perfect world, but you guys won't be a part of it because you guys are too imperfect. It's just like, what a dick, and then this horrific tragic sequence where all of Rocket's friends are then killed in front of him before he goes and escapes. It's like, it's traumatizing stuff. And like the fact that again, it's one of those things where it's like, I love it because this is a thing that I feel like Dave Filoni also did with that final season of the Clone Wars, The Drop, which is where he's evolved and matured with his audience. He understands that like there are people who have watched these movies and grown and evolved with these characters from, like you said, I talk to people now who were like 10 years old when the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie came out, who are now like freshmen in college. And like the fact that you have that much faith in your audience that you can pull off this, like, quite frankly, dark and disturbing subject matter in what is supposed to be a gigantic, big budgeted, like PG-13, like family friendly movie, quote unquote. It's awesome. And the fact that he's able to pull it off with so much nuance and so much maturity, really, it's almost uncharacteristic of him, because again, Gunn is somebody who has always been said is like, oh, he's such an immature filmmaker. Oh, he always puts like so many crass and immature jokes in there, And the fact that he does all of this, it's like, it's really inspiring, to say the least. It shows growth as a filmmaker, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, the specific moment when Lila dies, the camera just like lingers on Rocket crying. What feels like 2 or 3 minutes.
It's a long time.
He's weeping. He's like, I feel like if you're a kid watching that, you're like, I don't know. Even as an adult, I'm like, damn, this is like really like emotionally damaging right now.
My jaw was on the floor when that happened. I'm like, oh my God. Like, this is a kid's movie?
And you cut into the dead bunny and the dead walrus, just like, they're just like slouched over like this. And you Gunn like lingers on it long enough on those too. You're like, they're definitely dead.
Yeah. Because there's a brief minute when Lila gets shot, you're just like, what happened? Because they don't show her falling, in the High Evolutionary standing there with the gun, pun intended, for a while there, and then you have like Rocket killing all the other guards, and there's also that moment there too when you see like the dead bunny and walrus, and you're like, were those the guards, or like were those shots at like Rock that like ricocheted off the wall? So like there could be a moment where you're like, you're not sure if Rocket accidentally killed his friends there too, and like it's like there's a lot of moral ambiguity and questions to go into this there as well, where like I'm like, Jesus Christ.
It happens so fast too. Like you literally have one moment of happiness where like Lila and Rocket hug each other, like they're out of the cage, and literally a second or two later, everybody's dead.
And then the craziest part, that would be one thing if they just did that. But then when they're going to like, because basically like, so in order to basically break it down, what happens is that Adam Warlock attacks in the beginning, grievously injures Rocket. They're trying to, but they can't use their med packs on Rocket because the High Evolutionary has built in a kill switch into Rocket's system that needs to be disarmed before they can go in and perform like any surgery on him. So they basically, the problem is that they don't like know anything about his past, so they have to track down his file, which is in this place called the Orgosphere. They get the file from the Orgosphere, but then they realize that it's like, oh no, there's this the file itself is locked, and they need the code, which is with the High Evolutionary, which leads them to Counter Earth to go and try and get the code from the High Evolutionary itself. And so there's this big long process where they get the code. Quill and Groot are shooting their way out. They managed to get the hold of the one scientist who's played by the guy Maffeo, I think is the character from Superstore, who's one of the High Evolutionary scientists. They get the code. They're about to save Rocket. Rocket is about to die, and you have this fucking Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows-esque like almost like about to go into the light scene where he's about to go into like animal heaven and he sees his friends, and I'm like, what the hell am I watching here? Like I'm like, this is so much more tragic than I thought it was going to be. And then they have that moment where it's like, oh, it's not your time yet, before they bring it back. And I'm just like, I'm like sitting there in my seat sweating for what feels like 20 minutes. And I'm like, before they get back to like the crazy, action-packed explosion third act. And I'm like, Oh my God, like this is really going to a level that I didn't think that Marvel was even capable of. You know, we're now grappling with like existential questions of like what happens after death and like coming to terms with the tragedies of your past and all that. And I'm like, basically everything that I've wanted from Marvel movies for a while now, but wasn't actually expecting to get until now, you know, because everything up until this point has kind of just been like, oh, you know, you can it just kind of crappy like generic Disney movies. You could be the best that you could be, you know, you know, like Thor Love and Thunder is all about like Thor becoming a dad, and Multiverse of Madness is like Strange like apologizing to this girl, and you know, and like I feel like Black Panther Wakanda Forever came the closest to this, you know, but
Sure.
but this one for sure is just like, wow, like this is like this was not what I was expecting, to say the least, from this movie.
No, and this only happens with James Gunn. I do wonder if there's going to be a movie from Marvel that is as emotionally resonant as this is, at least in the near future. I don't think so.
I don't think
like,
so.
You can just watch you don't even need to watch the first two. Like, this movie perfectly sets up the arc for Rocket Raccoon, and you can understand clearly where his mind is at from beginning to end and where he goes from there. It is really dark too, like in the beginning of the movie when like Rocket is dying, like he's like bleeding in the chest, and like he's struggling to breathe, like
that's
he's like gasping for air,
and that goes into the action as well, because the action is filmed in a way that is so much more visceral that like it's so much, you know, so funny. So much of the time we complain that the action in these superhero movies just doesn't work because we're you know, because these characters are so super powered. You know, we literally see them like getting punched and like, you know, bungee jumped all over the place. You know, they fly through like thousands of buildings and like, you know, and they don't even have a scratch. But this one, like, I feel this is the first superhero movie in a while where like somebody gets hit, you're like, oh my God, I feel that. Like because the way that they shoot it, you know, you just have them like, you know, kind of slowly going through nowhere. You know, they're ambling, they're going about their day, they're all like calm, they're chill, relaxed. You have the one shot of Warlock flying towards them, but you don't see it again until like Rocket is like taking off his shirt and looking out the window before Warlock. It like happens so fast you don't even have time to think. And like the way that the action hit, like every time, like the way the Warlock like plows through everybody, you know, it's like you really feel them getting hit, you really feel the characters getting hurt, and it makes a difference here. It really does, because it's like when you feel the pain that the character's going through, it resonates with you as an audience member, and it makes you even that much more invested in the story as well. You know,
100%.
like the Drax fight with Warlock, when he's like, when Nebula, you know, they always do the thing where Nebula gets like messed up, or all over like bones and innards gets like shattered, but because of like they're all made of metal, they always like rearrange like this grisly like Cronenberg like robot-esque way. But like they use that to like dramatic grisly effect here as well. You know, but you're right, because it really makes a difference, because Rocket Raccoon, a CG character too, I will admit, you know, you really feel it when like he gets like hit, and when he's on that table, like being like kept alive on life support, essentially, you know?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most convincing CGI creations in like I can't with recency bias. Like, I'm trying to think of like the last really good, besides I guess Caesar from Planet of the Apes is the last time like I really was convinced by a character like that. But Rocket Raccoon is like in a time too where like there's a lot of, we talk about the writer's strike and the VFX artists like not getting their due and their time and their pay, but like whoever worked on these specific movies, like they need their flowers, because like Rocket Raccoon, like and Groot too.
Yeah, and Groot. This is the best that Groot has looked in a while. But besides the fact that Groot, after years, is finally full grown again, and man, Groot kicks some ass in this movie in a way that he hasn't gotten to in a long time. You know, I mean, Groot's been given like little moments here and there. You know, he's little and cute in Guardians 2, and he makes the handle for Thor's new hammer in Infinity War. But Groot, we haven't gotten to see Groot like really throw down like this in a while. So that was really refreshing to see him like full grown and like fighting with the team again. You know, he's kind of becomes Quill's de facto number 2 in this movie too. You know, since Rocket's on the med table for so much, like they got a great scene where they're back to back, just like shooting guys back and forth. You know, like I said, it really is like a traditionalist shoot 'em up action movie at points, and it really makes a difference.
I like the payoff of the gun thing, where like when Pill talks to Groot and he's like, you know what to do with those guns, and you're like, what is he gonna? Where's he putting them? And like he ends up taking out like 17 guns. They're all like, I'm like, where did he hide them?
It's like hide him inside. You know, and we get to see like Kaiju Groot too at 2 different moments. You know, first when they first land on Counter Earth, and then again in the post credit scene where you're like sitting there and you're like,
oh yeah,
okay, we know Groot's still with the team, and then like Groot, and he's like literally Kaiju mode. I'm like, oh, we got Mega Groot now. You know, like god damn.
Yeah, he was scary looking.
Yeah, he was. It was really well done. You know. So my last point that I wanted to bring up before we get out of here. So now that it's over, is this really goodbye? Because like I said, I am tempted to think that what's it called? I am tempted to think that that this will not be the last time that we see the Guardians of the Galaxy in any capacity, because like I said, at the end it is revealed in the post-credit scene that after all the Guardians go their separate ways, we officially have a new team that is being led by Rocket and Groot now, that is comprised of Kraglin, Cosmo the Space Dog, who is voiced by and very, very humorously so by Maria Bakalova. Adam Warlock is now part of the team, as well as Phyla Vel, who is another old traditionalist member of the Guardians, who is one of their, at the end of the movie they have to save a series of alien kids that the High Evolutionary has taken captive, and and Phyla is revealed to be the leader of them, and she joins the new iteration of the team. So we have a new iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy at the end of this one, even though everybody's gone their separate ways. Drax is kind of taking care of all these kids now. Nebula is running nowhere. Mantis has gone off with the Abelisks on her own in order to kind of try and find a new destiny. Quill officially says goodbye to Gamora. I have a little bit of a nitpick with Gamora, though, because this is something Dustin and I have been talking about for a while, which is that, like, didn't they say at the end of Endgame that everything that was displaced had to go back to its original timeline? I know they snapped away Thanos and all that, but they returned the Infinity Stones, but Gamora is still in the current timeline. So I'm a little bit skeptical where I'm like, okay, so the fact that 2014 Gamora still just lives in this timeline scot-free, I think that could have been a little bit more resolutionary, especially since, her death and her sacrifice was such an impactful and crucial plot point in Infinity War. Yeah, it kind of underrates that a little bit. So if I was going to nitpick this movie a little bit, it would be with that aspect of the fact that she's just chilling with the Ravagers now, and Quill has returned to Earth. He's just like, yeah, I'm going back to spend what little time I have with my grandpa. But they also, the end bit at the end, where they always have, this character will return in the next movie. They have the legendary Star-Lord will return. So that does lead me to question, is this really goodbye, But I have a feeling that this, again, I do still stand by the fact that this will be the last time that Gunn is heavily involved in the MCU. But is this the last time that we see the Guardians of the Galaxy? That I'm not so sure about. But overall, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, when I first saw that legendary Star-Lord will return tag, I thought my initial thought process was, oh, is this for Kang Dynasty or for
that's what I would assume,
Yeah, because I mean, they can announce a new project at some point, but I don't think they're making a new Guardians of the Galaxy movie anytime soon. At least I know eventually it's going to happen if they need to, but
yeah, like there are. I will say as well, they have hinted at like other cosmic stuff. We have the Marvels, unfortunately, coming out later this year. They've also heavily hinted that they are going to do a Nova project as well, and they have said that there would be other space and cosmic set Marvel films. I believe that they said that the Fantastic Four as well would involve cosmic aspects as well. So like I said, the Guardians of the Galaxy has done its job and set up the cosmic sphere. So like I said, will this be the last time that we see all of these characters? No, but like I said, for my money, as far as this being James Gunn's swan song, James Gunn's final time with these characters in the movie, and for this movie being as big and bombastic and huge as it was promising, I can safely say this delivered, and it absolutely was, again, everything that I could have wanted. This is easily a 9.5 out of 10 for me. This is a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is I still have yet to decide whether I like this more or Beau is Afraid, but this is easily, like, so far one of my favorite movies of this year, easily.
Yeah, I would agree. I haven't seen Beau is Afraid yet. I want to see it.
I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that one for sure. Yeah, depending on how you liked Ari's first two movies, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I like both of them, so I'm looking forward to seeing whatever the hell this movie is.
It is a ride, to say the least. I will say that. It is a wild ride.
So I've heard. But yeah, again, perfect capper for this trilogy. I think it works. It makes the first two movies better now because you can go back and see the growth of these characters, especially Rocket Raccoon, who was the focus of this movie. You have, in my opinion, I think the first movie had the weakest villain.
I agree.
I think Ego and High Evolutionary are two great end cap characters to really help hone in on these characters and bring them to the place where they are now. And it's got great action, great emotion. It's paced very well, even for it's the longest.
This is the longest Guardians movie. 2.5 hours long. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to watch it again and see how it holds up now, knowing how the trajectory of it is. I feel like it'll hold up well now, knowing what happens, because I think the discovery part of when you watch a movie is because you're constantly trying to see what's going to happen next.
Yes.
But I like rewatching a movie and being knowing how everything turns out. How does this feel like that? But I had a great time in the theater. Everybody who I watched it with was engaged with it, and it's emotionally deeper than people might expect. Visually, James Gunn, again, I feel like he took a lot of what he learned since 2017 in his own, what happened with Twitter and being fired and rehired and all that stuff. It actually kind of shows in this movie, because he said in interviews that he feels like he resonates most with Rocket Raccoon as a character, and you can kind of see that in this, where it's a very what's the word I'm looking for? Cathartic movie for him to have
Yes.
Rocket be in this better place by the end of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is, I thought, very good, and I think anybody who's a fan of these movies is going to be satisfied with
Yeah,
this.
I agree 100%. Yeah, I'll say this much for my money at least too. This is the first movie I would say since Megan that has actually made me go like, yeah, I kind of want to rewatch this movie now, like as soon as I can, you know. Which I can't say even like my favorite movies, like I can't say I've had that really that desire to do that with any other movie that I've seen so far this year. You know, every other movie this year has for me kind of been a letdown in some capacity. Even movies that I enjoyed, like Creed 3 and Super Mario Brothers. I'm like, yeah, I got everything I needed from that first time. You know, I don't really feel the burgeoning need to watch this movie. So the fact that this movie can still get that from me, I'm like, okay, you know, like I said, I was 17 when I saw that first Guardians of the Galaxy, or about to turn 17 when I saw that first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And here I am at almost 26, you know, almost 10 years later. So yeah, it's like I said, it's been a wild ride, and not to mention, this is also introducing a new facet as well to this what's it called? This is also showing a new facet as well to to the summer season as well, which is the Guardians of the Galaxy opening box office gross. I believe that it said currently that it is sitting at 48 million that it is officially open at. They are estimating for 110 to 120 opening weekend fully once they get in the worldwide numbers. Also, I believe that this is the first Marvel movie that is actually playing in China. I might have to look over those numbers, which it would be crazy after 3 years of movies not playing in China. We know that China box office is absolutely crucial to movies' lifelong box office facet. So like I said, we will be keeping track of all of the big summer tentpoles box office. We will see which one wins the summer overall. Do you have any predictions as to what's going to be the biggest movie of the summer so far?
I mean, what I want to be highest grossing, as long as it's a good movie, is Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
What I think is going to be the highest grossing, though, besides, I guess I can't count Super Mario Bros. Because that's not.
Super Mario Brothers, technically, yeah, because that's a spring release. Yeah, April.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Across the Spider-Verse.
You're gonna say Across the Spider-Verse. Okay.
I think that's my lock. Yeah.
That's your lock for number one. I'm torn because on the one hand, I'm like never bet against Fast and Furious. You know, even though F9 was a little bit of a lower gross. You know, I think that only did like 700 million, but that was still in technically during a pandemic. I'm going dark horse here. I'm going Oppenheimer. You know, I think that Never bet against Nolan for me. It's opening up against Barbie. You know, like I said, it's 1 week after Mission Impossible, and yeah, the fact that this is Nolan's like first like big like talking movie, but it's also like I don't know. I just have a feeling because again, if Tenet, I think that Tenet would have been possibly his highest grossing movie had it not opened during the middle of a pandemic. So yeah, I'm going Oppenheimer. I'm going complete dark horse, only because when I talk to people about like what they're actually interested in going to see in theaters, like the answer is only ever Oppenheimer. I think that Tom Cruise, he had his moment last year with Top Gun. I think the Mission Impossible phase, it's like because people are aware they have this familiarity with the Mission Impossible movies, you know. But I think Oppenheimer, that I'm going dark horse pick because I think if there was ever going to be a time, it's going to be that one. So that's my prediction for
if we get a drama movie to be the highest, that would be awesome.
That'd be crazy. That'd be crazy. You know. Also, this is an even wilder prediction, but I'm also predicting that Oppenheimer is going to be Nolan's first Best Picture win, hopefully. So
I feel like it's going to get nominated.
It's going to get nominated. It's going to get a lot of nominations for sure. But yeah, no. Like I said, I'm going dark horse. I'm going for big swings this year for sure. So that was it. That was our Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 recap. Like I said, Dustin and I are going live to do a Ben Affleck Hall of Fame next week, and then the following week we will be meeting for the second installment of our summer series, Fast X. I can't believe that's another one. Like that's what's been around. Wow, 10 years of Guardians of the Galaxy, 20 plus years of Fast and Furious. That's
crazy.
Absolutely insane. John, thanks for coming on, man. It was an absolute blast to have you here. Hope to have you back on for many more episodes going forward. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Of course, it's been a pleasure, dude. Everybody, you can basically find me at Mothman Jones on any social media platform. I've been on Twitter, I've been on TikTok, I've been on Instagram, everything you can think of, and on YouTube, same thing. Mothman Jones, occasionally putting out videos about movies, and I'm excited for the summer movie season. Hopefully, like you're saying, it's the first big year for movies. We're back, baby, and yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more on that. And of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talk TV podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. This episode will be available to listen to on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow morning. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.